Hi, and welcome to the ONF Spotlight on 5G. I'm Timon Sloane with the ONF, and today it's my pleasure to welcome Arnaud from Accelleran to discuss Accelleran's activities in the Open RAN space. Arnaud is the VP of Business Development with Accelleran, and ONF has had a long history with Accelleran as we worked together from the early days of mCord, and Accelleran is now a component that's integrated and deployed with our Ether platform. So we're very appreciative of this long and productive relationship. And with that, I'm very pleased to have Arnaud with us today, and I'm looking forward to hearing about current plans and their perspective in all the recent activity across the industry in Open RAN. So Arnaud, with that, please take it away.
Thank you, Timon, and thank you for having us on this spotlight session. It's a pleasure for us to participate because, as you said, I mean, we have a long history with ONF. I mean, long collaboration, and Accelleran has obviously always been at the forefront of the openness of the RAN. I'd like to show you today a bit how we see our positioning in this Open RAN movement. So, to start with, I'd like to let's say explain to you a bit the high-level view that we have on the Open RAN movement and our positioning. As you know, I mean, Accelleran is really coming from a history of RAN software expertise, and that's basically the way we started to work with ONF. So we're really coming from this RAN protocol and integration core assets that we have. I mean, we've been working on 4G RAN software for the last 10 years, developing our own 4G small cells, our own control plane. From the early days, I mean, the architecture, the openness of the architecture, the modularity and the quality have been at the forefront of our design and development processes. So we really started from this RAN software expertise. But over the years, I mean, we've been developing, as we were developing our own 4G control plane and now our 5G control plane, very strong expertise also in virtualization, containerization, and cloudification of the RAN. So even when we developed our 4G control plane, I mean, the vision that we had was that the RAN would be disaggregated, would be open, would be virtualized. So that's the way we really built our software. And then when virtualization came along, it was fairly easy for us to reproduce something which was open and ready to integrate with third parties. So moving beyond the pure RAN software expertise, I mean, we really went into virtualization, containerization, and cloud nativeness with our product. In terms of the Open RAN, there's a third dimension that we see and that has been developing along the years at Accelleran, is the domain of AI and RAN intelligence and automation. I mean, with the openness of the RAN, I mean, it's also the openness of the data. And from the early day of our vRAN product, we put a lot of emphasis to provide operators and integrators with access to the data that would allow them to make the RAN more intelligent. So we believe today our positioning is really, let's say, at the intersection of these three competencies. I mean, our history of RAN expertise, the developments that we've done in terms of RAN virtualization, containerization, and cloud nativeness, and then the addition of AI and RAN intelligence on top of the pure CU components. So how does that translate today into, let's say, our positioning on the market? So if you see on the left the reference architecture from ORAN, I mean, back already in 2019, Accelleran launched the Drax product at MWC 2019, and basically the Drax product was one of the first vRAN platform on the market which was aligned with the ORAN principle. And interestingly enough, I mean, even though initially the ORAN principle are built for, let's say, a 5G oriented world, I mean, we wanted to show the market that there was already benefits to be gained to implement these principles using 4G. So we launched our Drax platform, which is basically our historical, let's say, CU software assets, which we have virtualized, containerized, and made cloud native, as well as a RIC platform, let's say what would become today or RIC platform, and which was basically a platform that allows Accelleran initially, but also third-party developers to leverage the open data that this architecture was enabling, and most importantly, the control hooks that we were providing on the to our control plane. So that allowed very early company to experiment with what is now becoming, let's say, the RIC as a platform, and where we see market movements as recent as a couple of weeks ago. So that's a bit for the history of where we come from in terms of the virtualization with our CU plus RIC platform. So as I said, what are the principles that we followed when we developed this Drax platform is basically to say, well, we want to have a very loosely coupled CU, which is our historical asset, plus a near real-time RIC platform. We let's say we made the decision very early on, as I mentioned before, to have a cloud-native architecture oriented towards microservices. We wanted to have a platform which is, let's say, 4G and 5G, knowing that when we started, I mean, 4G, let's say, was still the main, I would say, trend of the day, and I think 4G still has a lot of bright future, but we wanted to make something which was evolutive, so that when customer or enterprises invest in this platform, they can evolve to 5G, and then scalability and openness. Openness in terms of the interfacing with third-party RAN components, but also openness, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of the data. And I think that's a very key element for us. I mean, we really built this near real-time RIC platform around, let's say, a data bus, which allows us to share data externally in near real time, and that expose control hooks so that we can create very efficient and near real-time control loop between xApps and the control plane. So these are really the design principles that we've built our platform around. And as I mentioned earlier, a key element is that this is not something that we've built from scratch. I mean, the CU part of this RIC on the 4G side when we launched it were just a refactoring of the existing control plane that we had been using on our integrated product earlier, and that thanks to the architecture that we had chosen, were very easy to virtualize, containerize, and let's say make cloud native in this first instantiation of our platform. So a few words on cloud nativeness. I mean, for us, it's a very important theme. I mean, it's important that to realize that, let's say the reason and the capability that we have to make a cloud native platform is quite unique. I mean, I think we made that decision in the very early days of Accelleran in terms of, let's say, the architecture choice that we are making, that has been driving us to the ability to create let's say, a cloud native platform, which is really microservices built in terms of the way we develop software, the way we test software, but it also goes about, let's say, the whole DevOps that we've put around the development of this platform. So that's something which I think a lot of companies are looking at, but I think that we've been pioneering in on the RAN space at least. So, as I mentioned, and without getting into the details of the architecture, for us, openness is a key element. And in this Open RAN movement, I mean, we obviously look at the openness, let's say, towards the U and the RU. But as far as we are concerned, openness is also, let's say, making sure that we can integrate with, let's say, third-party orchestration, third-party OSS, following, let's say, the ORAN principles and interfaces. And without diving into the detail, I think it's important to note that, let's say, we've been very early to develop and to document, APIs, be that netconf, REST, and now align with the ORAN, let's say, standards, so that, let's say, our platform, be that the CU and the RIC, can be used and interfaced by third-party integrators and other RAN components. So, as I mentioned, the Drax platform is basically the, let's say, the sum of a CU plus a rig platform. So let's spend a minute on the CU. So obviously, our CU today interfaces with the Open RAN, with the ORAN defined interfaces to third-party DU and RU platform. And as I mentioned, most importantly, I mean, the design principles that we followed, if we zoom on this, for instance, on this CU-CP, and again, I'm not going to give a detailed architecture class on, let's say, on the platform. I mean, you will see that this is a set of microservices which are themselves scalable and which can be deployed in a meshed service environment, potentially on a multi-node platform when and if need be. But so these are very key design principles that we've really started to implement in 4G and that we are now also implementing in 5G. So the microservices architecture doesn't stop, I would say, at the block that are defined in the ORAN architecture. But if we zoom on each of these blocks, I mean, you will see that, let's say, we really have, let's say, a very fine-grained componentized architecture that allows us a lot of flexibility in terms of deployment scenarios. So you were mentioning, Timon, earlier that we're partnering with ONF in the Ether project, and that's what will come up on my next slide. So there you go. So we've indeed been using the Drax CU in the Ether project. And which allows us to very easily deploy a new site. And I think people on this call will be familiar with what the Ether Enterprise Edge as a Service is. We basically can easily deploy a new enterprise edge connectivity service on a new enterprise, including, let's say, a virtualized CU that we are providing with our Drax platform, and which you finally see emerging in yellow on this slide after the build out. Okay, so that's basically one of the examples that we can show in terms of the collaboration with ONF and the usage of the Drax CU in a purely virtualized environment with the Ether project, but that's just one example. So that was for the CU. Let's say the next element I want to mention is next to the CU, very early in the development of our Drax platform, we also realized the importance and the interest of exposing and making available the let's say the data and the control hooks through our RIC platform. So next to the CU, I think the RIC, so the RAN Intelligent Controller, is something which is very important for us. And next to the platform, I mean, we've been investing as Accelleran in the development of specific xApps on our own or with in partnership with other companies. So let's say we really see the RIC platform today as basically what we could call an app store for the RAN, and a way for Accelleran, but also for third party to exploit the open data that we make available. So type of things that we've been developing, and I will give a few examples later in the presentation, are elements like ANR, so automated neighbor relationship management, PCI allocation automation, plug and play. I will speak about that a bit more later. But what's also interesting is that very early we saw partners that showed interest in also developing their own xApps, and some of them, I mean, we have a research institute, IMEC, which has been developing a smart handover application, but also MNOs like BT in the context of a project with TIP, looking at an interference management xApp on the Accelleran RIC platform, and most recently, I mean, the extension of that project to tip run intelligence and automation work group. So I think in the very early days, so the bet that we took in putting on the market, let's say a CU plus rig platform was quite interesting and gathered quite some momentum because customers could really see the value of having, let's say, a rig platform, let's say a framework that allowed them to develop xApps, but not on a simulated environment, on a real CU with real radio, with real UE, on which they can re-experiment and understand the value, let's say, of a rig platform for different use cases. And that has translated with multiple partners in the development of xApps, which are in use today in multiple, let's say, deployments. So let's dive a bit further into this rig platform. Again, let's say the way we see that is that we see this platform as a framework for, let's say, third party and for Accelleran to develop xApps on top of a let's say of a publish subscribe database, so very easy to interface with, and with the support of what we called core rig services. Without getting into the details, I mean, that allow you to, for instance, get information about the state of the underlying run components, to have access to the API proxy. So in the very early days, I mean, we started to develop our own xApps, and very quickly we had, let's say, third party getting on board and interfacing with let's say, with our database to build their own xApps. So what we are offering with that is, as I mentioned, I mean, it's a let's say a cloud native platform. It's very easy to install, so it's totally microservice and containerized. So you install it with Helm, so it's very easy to deploy. So very quickly you can get let's say to develop, let's say, and focus on algorithm and not on integration. So that's really been the, let's say, what has interested our customers and our partners, is that they used to spend a lot of time to implement algorithm that they may have, let's say, developed already, but that they could not implement because it was difficult to integrate. And because of the open data movement that the Open RAN is bringing, I mean, they were getting access very easily to, let's say, to this to a framework that allow them to implement this algorithm. So what they get at this point is that it's a framework that brings them, as I said, open data, open controls, and rig services, but also next to that, a very well-defined framework as to how they should be writing xApps, how they can onboard xApps, so they can really focus on the algorithm and not on the integration and not on the orchestration and life cycle of their application. So that has been very useful. So they basically use skeleton xApps that we provide, and they really focus on the algorithmic part and they leverage, let's say, the core services that we make available on this platform. And as you can see here, I've given a few examples of xApps that we have developed, and some of them that have been developed by partners, and there are more currently in development. So one of the examples, for instance, just to show let's say, how easy it is. I mean, one of the first xApps that we have developed is a simple dashboard, a simple GUI. But the interest of that is to show that a third party could very easily build a fully functional user interface on top of our, let's say, Drax platform that use exactly the same documented API as we have been doing for this xApp. So this dashboard, which we ship with our Drax platform, allows you to do let's say, basic monitoring, basic configuration, basic monitoring of the system health and the xApps onboarding. But this dashboard has been written as an xApp, following the principle of xApp development that we have documented, and that we document toward third-party developers who want to integrate with our platform. So without getting into the details, you see here, let's say, how this is built. I mean, the architecture is very simple. It's all Kubernetes oriented, installed through a Helm chart again. So it's something that any third party could have developed on top of the public API that we expose to third parties. Other examples of xApp that I want to highlight here is, for instance, the plug and play management, and that ties a bit more into, let's say, the automation aspect that I was highlighting at the beginning of this presentation. Is that we've also been using the RIC and the xApps to combine them to really provide, let's say, a plug and play capability, a Wi-Fi-like installation capability, for instance, in the context of enterprise network. I mean, it's a strong belief that today, obviously, the Open RAN movement is very important to mobile operators, but we also see a lot of traction with that type of architecture and that type of capability and automation in the enterprise market. And one of the applications that we've been investing a lot in for that market is the plug and play management, whereby you can very easily build up your network without being an expert in 4G and 5G, and where you get to, let's say, a real plug and play type of approach, where you can get your, let's say, your radio out of the box, install it, and you get to some level of auto configuration, bringing your cell on air, doing ANR, PCI location, and constantly monitoring the, let's say, the change in the environment, so that you can keep, for instance, neighbor management in sync with the way your network evolves. So that's something which is very attractive, and which has been, let's say, something that we've been using, as I said, in the private cellular market, where, as we see it, the simplicity of deployment and operation is very important. So it's key to us also as a, let's say, as a niche player, to say that we are using these capabilities not only, let's say, in the mobile operator market, but also in the emerging private cellular market. And we really start to see a lot of traction with these capabilities of automation that the RIC xApps can bring on top of our CU. Another element that we are currently looking at, also leveraging the RIC, is to extend it beyond the pure 4G and 5G world into Wi-Fi. So we are currently involved in research projects in Europe that are experimenting with that, and we also, let's say, leveraging the RIC as a really multi-connectivity platform that allows very smart scenario between, let's say, Wi-Fi and cellular. And last but not least, I mean, let's say, we really see that the xApps and the capability for third party to leverage the data for, let's say, as a huge, value generation tool for integrators, vertical integrators in specific domain, be that in enterprise or in neutral host, for instance, and that's already something that we can see today in our let's say, in our customer base. So as a conclusion to this presentation, I would say that let's say we really believe that Accelleran is, let's say, at the intersection, let's say, of three main elements of the Open RAN movement. Obviously, a core asset, which is something that you cannot do without, is the knowledge of the RAN. I mean, you cannot start without that. I think it's key that you know the RAN when it comes into, let's say, leveraging the data that it can generate and generating, let's say, value out of the Open RAN movement. But next to that, I think, let's say, we also leverage, let's say, cloudification capabilities and skill, and more also AI and RAN automation capabilities through the RIC, and through, most importantly, the xApps that are being developed by Accelleran or by Accelleran's partner in collaboration with Accelleran. And that's how I will conclude this presentation. Thank you.
Arnaud, so thank you, and terrific presentation today, and really pleased to have you here with us today. And I think what was notable for me at hearing your presentation is, how early Accelleran was really embracing a cloud-native architecture and disaggregation, not just of sort of the RUDU CU kind of view on things, but within the controller space, within the application space. And I think that's really exciting and really nicely aligned with where we see the industry going, and a lot of the discussion that's happening right now around RIC and xApps in Open RAN. So, I'm curious, you've been kind of in this space, maybe an earlier mover in this space as well. So, maybe you've come across different ideas for different types of xApps, new and novel things. So, since you have this open platform, and if there's anything that you can think of or that you might share today with us.
Yeah, yeah. Let's say obviously I gave a few examples already, yeah, but there are certainly let's say other type of xApps that we are looking at, and that let's say our partners are looking at. I mentioned some let's say some cases, for instance, like obviously the obvious one that are around the radio management, like ANR and PCI, but I think more recently we've been talking with the partners looking at energy management, for instance. So how can you optimize, let's say, the energy consumption of your network? That's one key element. The other aspect which start to come up is the aspect of multi-connectivity, and especially in the enterprise space, let's say, and that's obviously an extension of I would say, of the RIC, which is a bit beyond what ORAN itself, I think, looks at today, but the aspect of multi-connectivity when you go to the enterprise. I mean, obviously, the question is, well, I have my Wi-Fi network. How do I manage that along let's say, with my private cellular network, right? And let's say, how can that intelligence kind of look at both sides of the story? So the integration of multi-connectivity is another let's say, element that we are currently actively looking at.
All right, yeah, very good. And actually, that area of power management has come up, and power is such a big issue actually in cellular networks and whatnot. So that's that is interesting. So then, the next layer of that is, I'm curious about how you've dealt with xApp conflict resolution. I mean, to some degree, the xApps have been yours, but you have started to open to third-party xApps as well. And so, those apps may conflict for certain resources or for certain tasks.
Yes. No, it's a very interesting question. I think when we started that journey, I think it was, I would say, quite, with a very limited number of partners or only Accelleran developing. That was a problem that was not really something which was major, right? But I think as we now start to see, let's say, something a bit more structured in terms of different apps having to communicate with each other, we started to put, let's say, some kind of developer framework together, which let's say also comes along with a let's say a life cycle management and a security management in terms of how xApp interact with each other and what is the precedence of their decisions, for instance, and whether they can totally be automated or whether they need to get some I was talking about PCI allocation or ANR management. I mean, do you want to fully automate it, or do you want to leave some degree of freedom to administrator to say, yes, I want to change it, or when do I want to change it? Okay, so those are things that we are now starting to implement into our framework, this type of elements. And the first thing that we've really done is, how do we allow xApps to communicate with each other? So as part of our framework, I mean, we recreated this as part of the xApps onboarding and as part of the xApp framework. Let's say a way I was talking about the data bus. How do xApp access to their own topic? How can they expose their own data on a specific topic so that other xApp can also leverage that? Okay, so those are the type of elements that we've been implementing in the framework, and this is still work in progress. Let's be very honest as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that is what it is, but in a very exciting area, but it is a work in progress.
Yes.
And then you mentioned something else, which is also a work in progress, but a very exciting area, which is I mean, you framed it as do the xApps take control, or do you still allow the administrator to have some control? Yep. I mean, when AI and ML starts to come into the picture, which is an area where there's quite a lot of interest building, and the excitement about being able to apply AI and ML in the RAN space for optimization is growing day over day. Again, that challenge is going to come up, repeatedly, and so, I know that you've been thinking about the AI ML. I guess I'm wondering, have you yet had a chance to start to really get your toes wet with anything that is really applying, machine learning in any form?
Well, let's say we have a collaboration with I mentioned IMEC, which is a research institute in Belgium, with let's say, who have been competing in a DARPA project in the US. You may be familiar with that. So they've developed a lot of let's say of AI competencies around that, and they've been implementing some xApps. I was mentioning the smart handover, for instance, where I know that they are using some ML techniques, but don't quote me on exactly what they would be, because they have been the one developing that. So that's an example xApps that has been using specific ML techniques. And let's say the PCI xApp is also something where, let's say, we are starting to experiment with that as well. I know that in the context of interference management, that's also an xApp where I understand there is some AI and ML being implemented, but again, that's done by a partner. So I wouldn't, I think that's best that you ask the question to the operator doing that. I think there's going to be a white paper published by TIP on the result of what they have done on interference management. So I think we'll have more details when that comes out.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. We look forward to that.
Yep.
And I think part of this journey too is this notion of open data, and so extracting all this data out of the RAN in a form that is in some standard format, so that more and more of this kind of intelligence can be applied over time. And so yeah, a very exciting area, and it's great to see that you're kind of aligned and have been thinking along those lines all along.
Yes.
And I suppose maybe the last thing I'd like to touch on, I think you mentioned private networks and enterprise networks, and I'm curious on what you're seeing there. The opportunities for RAN and for cellular, and then CBRS spectrum and whatnot, really opening up perhaps the potential for quite a number of new types of applications of cellular and open cellular in the enterprise space.
Yeah. No, I think this is still a very emerging market, right? I mean, it's something which is in its infancy. I mean, we obviously need to have the right spectrum available so that the innovation can also be developed. But I think you were mentioning CBRS. I mean, for sure in the US, that's something that drives a lot of interest in innovation. In Europe, I mean, we also have a few countries which are starting to open up spectrum for enterprise use. I think Germany was one of them, and one of the first one in Europe, and that's certainly where we see the most traction, and where we see, for instance, big industry beyond. I think when you look at private sector, I think initially it was a lot for utilities, I mean, mining, ports, and so on. But we start to see other type of industry gaining interest into that. I mean, let's say we've been talking, for instance, with the car manufacturing industry, where there are very specific use case for, let's say, for cellular that they are struggling to achieve with Wi-Fi, for instance, and where, again, them not being, let's say, at all, let's say, expert in that, they look a lot for automation. Them and their system integrator partners. So I was mentioning on one of my slides the fact that it's important to get to simplicity and automation. It's not only for the end customer. I think it's also very important for the integrators who are getting into that space, coming from the Wi-Fi space and trying to develop a new line of business around private cellular. So that's really where we're investing in. I think that's the need that we're really trying to help a few integrators in the development of private cellular solutions that are as easy as Wi-Fi to deploy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's an exciting area. And I don't know if you're far enough along yet, but I guess I'm imagining that at some point in time, specialized xApps for enterprise verticals seem to make sense. Specialized way to use spectrum and apply for a mine or for a car manufacturer or something.
No, absolutely. And this is really an area in which we're trying to develop a lot, and we start to see emerging interesting use cases, because as we expose integrators who are very specific on a sub-vertical of the enterprise market to the capabilities of what can be done on the xApps, I think there's a lot of interest and I would say creativity that pops up, right? And they say, oh, maybe I could solve this, or you've done smart handover, so maybe I could do some predictive handover. I could do something a bit different than the classical, RAN network or even Wi-Fi can provide. So this is really something where we need to bootstrap that market segment. I think there's a lot of appetite, but there's also a lot of education to provide to allow this this capability to be used by the bigger number. And that's what we've been really trying to do, is to say, well, if you guys have an idea, you need to have a very low barrier of entry in terms of technology to be able to leverage the data and to create your own xApps. And I think that's starting to pick up. I think there's also a lot of industry push for that. ONF, I mean, has been pushing that as well recently, and that's great. I see other companies. I think the more, I mean, this ecosystem will be, let's say, will be fostered, I think the more innovation we will see. I think at the end of the day, it's going to be a collective innovation. I think that's what we've been trying to do, is not so much about the platform plays, really what is the use case that you want to solve, and how can we enable you to solve it as easy as possible.
Yeah, Arnaud, very good. Well, it's a very exciting area, and I'm really pleased to have you with us here today, and really excited to see what happens over the next year, or 6 months, or 3 months. The space is moving fast.
Excited as well. Thank you for having us again. It was a pleasure to be with you today.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.